Good evening, listeners. It's me, your host, RamblingRamm. I'm here with some more stories to scare, shock, and horrify you. Or possibly, just possibly, let you know what's really out there in the dark. Enjoy, listeners. A Foggy Evening by Terrify. As the day's last sunlight was cutting its way through the clouds, deep within a forest there was a cottage. I was there, as I tend to be in midsummer. The sun had just fallen beyond the horizon, and I was sitting outdoors, lakeside, looking straight ahead as the dim light faded beyond the trees. Forest surrounded me from all sides, and the ever-watchful eyes of my hound stared into the mist, rising above the lake, above the woods. There was an eerie feeling floating about. As the mist floated above nature itself, so did the air of uncertainty that tainted my mind. This has become a tradition for me, just coming here for a day or two, to take a break, unwind, and relax. Stress tends to consume me because of my occupation, and the dark thoughts seem to just fade away while I am here. But now things are wrong, as if my presence here is forbidden. But I push these feelings aside, because for 6 years I have been here this time of year, and I've gotten used to odder happenings around here. Silhouettes creeping around the yard, steps being taken around the house just after me, but somehow they have not given a single sign of malevolence to me. Every time anything like that happens, I just feel safe, and even cozy at times. I had even seen some shades today, but they were frantic, and one was even flailing at the air as if it was trying to fight something, before it got lifted from the ground and into the air, promptly disappearing atop the fog. So, usually, whatever spirits inhabit these grounds clearly don't mind me, so I decide not to bother them either. But this mist, I know that it's deeply wrong. I sat there for a while, and the mist sat there with me. It engulfed my mind, and soon I noticed a shade dashing behind my cottage, as if it was running from something. This was not usual for them, so I thought that I should go and see what's going on. Who knows, maybe it's still there. As I got up, my dog took off with me, and with its tail between its legs, it reluctantly followed. I reached the house and walked along the southern wall, still keeping my distance from it, until I almost reached the corner where the shade was spotted. As I expected, no trace of anything, as always. Then something behind me broke the silence. A sound ripped through the air, and it felt as if the fog rippled and shook. It was a rumble, like thunder, but localized, like some horrible animal that was awoken from its slumber. I did not take a glance behind as I dashed behind my cottage. Never had I run that fast in my life, as some primal instinct took control of me. I ran to the northern side of the cabin. I glanced behind me and saw this thing following me, slowly, steadily, and with clear purpose. Its morbid visage could only be seen for a moment, before the fog rolled in to cover it up, as if it was using it to get the jump on me. For the few seconds that I saw it, I took note of a few details. The thing was man-sized and shaped, and hefty in its form, yet it seemed to move forward with grace, as if gliding across an invisible surface. Large antlers on its head were not far from a crown, and it seemed to be naked, not afraid of showing its obese visage. The face was left in the shade, but the scariest thing about it was there was something behind it. Something large, far larger than the cottage, and far taller than the trees. It was engulfed by the mist, and I knew, even though I was under stress, that something of that size should not exist. Like a snake's head leaping towards prey, the grotesque man-thing dashed towards me, not in a straight line, but swaying from side to side. And it was then that I saw that it was a part of the huge thing behind it, connected via a pulsating strand, or a tentacle of sorts. Far too thin to realistically push it like that. I did not even have time to process what happened, because I was already in the thing's grasp, and its arms wrapped around me. Its face was horrifying. A single green, huge eye looking at me, staring deep into me, judging my actions, my life, my sins. Slowly it shook its head, as if to signal disappointment and failure. I tried to flail my hands to harm it, but it did not care, and my blows did not seem to even affect it at all. Hitting it was like hitting a brick wall. We started to rise, and as my feet stopped touching the ground, I saw the thing behind it. A macabre mass of flesh and intestines that reached far above the trees. On its mass were paws that seemed to be emitting the fog, and as I gazed below me, I saw thousands of these man-things, all different shapes and sizes attached to it, roaming the area. I saw my dog barking after me, as if nothing was even happening. One of those things even passed it, yet it did not even seem to acknowledge the animal. They were chasing the shades, and the more they caught, the more of them were starting to lift up, leading them to the same fate that I was sure to experience soon enough. When I was so high that I could not see the damn ground, all I could see was this fleshy mass that had something resembling a mouth on top of it. It might have been hundreds of meters wide, but I was way too tired and could not bear the thought of this thing anymore. So as it dropped me into its maw, I closed my eyes and drifted off into my thoughts. Grey Road by The Watchful Eye 1. I live in a small town. Last October, my sister and I decided we want to get some pumpkins, so we decided to take a drive, enjoy the fall leaves, and hopefully run across someone selling some nice-looking pumpkins. We didn't have a destination in mind, so we just drove. I took a road near my parents' house that I've travelled 1,000 times as it heads towards my grandparents. It's a well-known road. I've seen it so many times, nothing about it is unfamiliar, or so I thought. As we drove in the direction of my grandparents, I spot a sign off to the left. Grey Road. I've never seen this road before, so I asked my sister if we should check it out. It was freshly paved. Did the town put it in over the summer and we just didn't notice? The road went up a hill, impossibly tall trees with beautiful fall leaves. It was quite beautiful, but there were no houses, so my assumption must have been correct. At the top of the hill, the road went right. More beautiful trees. Turning to the right, I figured the road would eventually pick up one of the 3 nearby roads, and would just be heading a different route in the direction of my grandparents. Except, it didn't. We drove like 20 minutes. This seemed way too long to intercept one of the other roads. Eventually, Grey Road dipped down the hill and terminated into another road, off of which were several small streets paved in brick. We've reached what appears to be a small development with houses. The trees are stately and beautiful, the houses immaculately kept. Oddly though, the street signs looked extremely old, like they were from the 1940s. I drove down several of the streets, but they all terminate one to another. 1 or 2 of the houses have a few pumpkins out for sale, but nothing caught our eye. I realized something though. It's very still. There is no activity, no cars in any of the driveways, and no apparent people. I suddenly got really uncomfortable, as it's late afternoon and the sun was starting to get behind the tall trees. My sister and I simply conclude that there are no good pumpkins in this development. Instead of going back up Grey Road, I decide since I took a right at the base of the hill, if I continued in that direction, it will just pick up the road that goes to my grandparents'. We drove some ways past some abandoned-looking farms with uncut fields and grass. Seeing as that there are farms, I asked my sister if I should take a small side road and see if there are any houses selling pumpkins down that way. She agreed, so I turned down this road off to the left. This one had no street sign. There were no houses. It just seemed to go on into a densely wooded area. I'm a bit uncomfortable, and the road is too narrow to easily back up, so I executed basically a 36-point turn just to get my Crown Vic back in the other direction. I took a left and continued down the road that should, I think, intercept the road that goes to my grandparents'. More abandoned farms. The road dipped down a little into a valley of sorts, and terminated with a sharp left onto Lennox Road, which I know, so I turned left, which would lead away from the road to my grandparents'. Only it doesn't. I ended up at the corner of my grandparents' road, but on the opposite side of it. This is physically impossible to have done so, because I would have crossed their road to get to the opposite side, except I didn't. Plus, I know all the roads that cross it. My sister and I sat in silence for a bit, then drove back to town without pumpkins. I dropped her off at her house. We've not discussed the matter since. I think we both know something wasn't right. I decided to try and go back the following day, earlier in the morning, so I had more time to investigate. Except there was one slight problem. I couldn't find Grey Road. Perhaps I missed it. I had a good idea where it was, but since I'd never been aware of it before, I circled around a few times. There was no sign of Grey Road. Okay, fine. I figured the road that cut onto Lennox would lead me back. So I drive the 15 minutes or so, turn right onto Lennox, but can't find the road that I came out of. I'm piecing together from where Grey Road was. It would have been physically impossible to have open farm fields had I turned right at the end. Something wasn't right. I drove back home and went on Google, but the satellite images were all obstructed by tall trees in the area where I turned onto Grey Road, and there was no indication of vacant farm fields. I went to the library to get the town road plans, but they were all outdated, and since Grey Road appeared to have been new, it wasn't on there. The development I stumbled across would theoretically have been the next town over, so not finding it wasn't too alarming. The librarian on duty was an older lady, so I asked her if she knew of Grey Road, or the development. She simply said, "Some will go, and some will stray. Never take the road that's grey." I asked her what she meant, and she asked me politely to leave the library, which was very strange. I've asked a few people around town, and no one seems to want to talk about it, or have never heard of Grey Road. The most I got out of anyone is an old guy at the town store curtly replied, "Something happened, and that's it," which leaves it as much a mystery as the librarian's weird poem. So, here I am, left wondering what happened. I was on the transitway 1 second, then gone the next. By Manon Lycett. I don't know exactly what led up to it, to me being transported to that world of literal smoke and shadows. I just remember sitting on the bus, wishing the traffic would let up so I could get home. That's it. Just a regular, normal, everyday bus ride. I don't know if I said something, or did something, or sat somewhere I shouldn't have to trigger it. I just know I was on the transitway headed home 1 second, then gone the next. I can vaguely recall seeing finger-like tendrils of smoke billowing in from the windows, moments before my world was enveloped in white fog, stretching as far as the eye can see. The seat I was sitting on disappeared beneath me, and I fell on solid ground. My body felt strange, like my insides were drenched in static, or like that prickly feeling you get when you fall asleep on your arm, but without the numbness. I thought, I hoped, I'd dozed off on the bus and was dreaming, but everything felt so real. There was a smell to the air, a breeze, pain from the fall, and this incessant low drum putting pressure in my ears. It didn't feel like a dream, it just looked like one. I pushed myself to my feet and took a few tentative steps. The gravity here was all wrong. I felt weightless, like being in the water, but without the thickness of the liquid slowing my movements. My body practically fluttered through the atmosphere, yet I was still tethered to the ground. Everything about this place was wrong. I had no idea what to do. There's no tutorial on what to do if you suddenly get transported into a world of fog. Obviously someone needs to write one. My first thought was, holy shit, I'm dead. My bus had jackknifed, had fallen into a ditch, and I had died. This was the afterlife. No god, no devil, just thick fog, gusts of air, and a whole lot of nothing. Just when I thought I'd come to terms with my reality, or, fallen into the throes of shock, I guess, I saw something in my peripheral vision. I whipped my head and caught sight of a shadow passing by, like a silhouette standing behind frosted glass. Desperate to see who it was, I ran after it, but the shadow never became tangible. It was like chasing a rainbow. It looked real, like you could catch it, but it was always out of reach. I slowed to a stop, only to have another shadow pass right in front of my nose. These things weren't solid. They were made of smoke. Great. I glanced around and saw more of them. Big ones, small ones. It was strange, because their silhouettes weren't so blurry that I couldn't make out distinctive features. I could see horns, lumps, snouts, all tied to shadows that stood and walked like humans. Another creature walked by, this one as tall as a building. I found myself frozen with fear, hoping it couldn't see me. It had a tail. 2 tails? Something was whipping around behind him. His arms were long and his knuckles dragged on the ground like an ape. He could have crushed me if he could have touched me. As he passed, those tails sliced through me, and I felt nothing but momentary increase in the static. Suddenly, I wasn't quite as worried anymore. I mean, don't get me wrong, I was still hella freaked out, but at least I wasn't in danger. In the near distance, a thick tendril of smoke slithered along the ground like a snake in the grass. It was so long I couldn't see where the shape ended. It was denser than the other shadows, but I didn't really think much of it. At least, not until the shadow of a centaur-like creature trotted by, and the tendril struck. It wrapped itself around its hind leg, tugged, and the smoky centaur became not so smoky anymore. The impact of its fall lifted the fog around it, giving it weight. I was wrong. It wasn't a centaur. It was more like an anthropomorphic goat, with strong, muscular human torso covered in thick, black mane that fed into a sleek, nimble-looking goat's body with all 4 legs. The goat taur thrashed, barring and squealing as it tried to break free, but the tendril held firm. I tried to run, but like you can't get closer to a rainbow, I couldn't get farther from the goat or the tendril. Or hell, I don't know. Maybe I was running in place. With the odd gravity and the lack of points of reference, I honestly couldn't tell whether I'd moved at all from my initial starting point. I closed my eyes and pulled a Dorothy, wishing I was home. I heard a terrible roar that shook the ground. I opened my eyes, only to see what the source of the tendril was. It was coming from a tower of thick, black smoke, with 6 stones hovering just outside of the blackness. No, not stones. Eyes. 4 glimmering purple eyes. 2 half-moon eyes that blinked at different intervals. The half-moons were locked on me, but the other 4 were on the goat-taur. The tower of smoke became a mound, and the mound began to waffle side to side, as though being pulled in different directions. It was trying to decide whether to eat me first or save me for dessert. I don't think I've ever felt more powerless in my life. The logical thing to do was run, but running did nothing. I was just exhausting myself. The 4 purple eyes aligned at the top of the mound, and a spherical shape stretched out to meet them. The circle was still attached to the mound by a thin neck that spooled out as needed. A second head appeared, this one, too, stretching out to the pair of half-moon eyes gazing at me. The head with the 4 eyes whipped down at the Gotor, 2 tendrils shooting out to join it. They held the Gotor down as the disembodied eyes seared their way into the Gotor's sockets. It bucked and screamed in pain. I could hear the sizzle as its eyes melted and were replaced with the purple ones. I was shaking, sweating, in tears. The Gotor let out a final whine, and then it stopped moving. The purple eyes now burned into it blinked, and suddenly the goat's body began to crack like an old painting. Pieces of it flaked away, until only a thick, black, blob-like shadow remained, with the purple eyes attached where its head had been. It stood and trotted into the mound, adding to its volume. The 4 purple eyes turned to me. Oh, crap. A tendril whipped towards me and I tried to run, but like I said before, there was nowhere to run. It caught me by the wrist. The head with the half-moon eyes slowly stretched towards me, and the eyes detached. They floated closer and closer to me, aligning with my sockets. I thought I was a goner. I legitimately thought I was going to die even in the goddamn afterlife. But then the weirdest thing happened. A crow. A fucking crow swooped in out of nowhere and pecked at the eyes. The 6-eyed shadow freak roared so loud the ground shook. Its half-moon-eyed head snapped back up like a yo-yo, and the tendril holding me released its grip. Movement drew my eyes overhead, where the silhouettes of birds circled around. There were hundreds of them, and as I watched, they broke from their shadowy forms and became tangible. They flew toward the 6-eyed creature, cawing and scratching. The mound of smoke retracted back into a pillar, and the eyes whipped around frantically. My vision was a mess of birds and feathers flying through the air. I squinted and tried to see what was happening. But then I felt a hand on my chest. A hand that made the staticky feeling retreat. I squinted and saw a man with raven black hair and bright golden eyes staring back at me. He shoved me hard, and I fell back. I felt like I was falling down a well. I could see the smoky world disappearing through an ever-shrinking hole as I fell deeper and deeper, and suddenly I landed in the middle of the bus aisle, as though I'd lost my balance when the driver hit the brakes. Everyone was looking at me, and to them I must have looked pretty weird. You know, disproportionately freaked out about falling on the bus. Someone held me back up and I guess I must have seemed shaky, because someone else gave me their seat. I rode home, reeling from what happened. It's morning now, and I'm still reeling. Shit. Like I said at the start, I have no idea what caused this. I think that's what scares me the most. If I don't know how or why it happened, can I keep it from happening again? Well, listeners, I sincerely hope you enjoyed the tales that I brought you this evening. It would be a great pleasure to me if you would like, comment, and subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. And please wait for me to bring you more tales to alter your perception of how the world may really be. This is RamblingRamm, signing off. Good night, listeners, and sweet dreams.